All right, so thank you so much for joining me. And I'm back. Here we're talking about just how to taste like a pro. So maybe you're really great at drinking, but you wonder, how are you gonna know if you actually like a wine, what to do when you're swirling and sipping and smelling? And I'm gonna get to all of that today, but we're just gonna start by talking about some wines. These Harry and David wines are all from Oregon. So I am talking about the New World, but a relatively cool climate today. So when I say New World, I just mean everything other than Europe. Europe is the old world. But in Oregon, in the summertime, they have these beautiful warm days, and at night, these super cool nights that like retain acidity in all the little grapes. So if you're not too sure what I mean by acidity, it makes your mouth water. You can tell I had a little sip just now because my mouth is seriously watering. I need like a napkin sometimes with these cool climate wines, which I think is delicious and amazing, especially if you pair it with cheese. But let's just go ahead and get started. I am tasting the 2019 Sauvignon Blanc here from Harry and David. And I always like to look at the color of Sauvignon Blanc because it's generally so bright and vibrant and a little bit green. I don't know if you can see that, but they say, you can judge a book by its cover, or you shouldn't, but you can actually judge a lot by a wine's color, red more than white. But Sauvignon Blanc always has that really shiny, especially around the rim kind of color. So when I first pick up a wine, I tend to swirl it. That's really what, not you should do, but what I like to do, really just to get all the flavors going, because you don't want to just put your nose in there. You want to be able to really smell it. So have yourself a nice glass that's big enough, not too big because you might lose some of those flavors, and not a flute, right? Because you can't get much in your nose or much to swirl with that. So I just like to use one of these like white wine glasses, and I swirl a couple of times, and I smell a couple of times before tasting, actually, which might be a personal thing, but it's because I tend to get a lot every time I am smelling. So put your nose in there and then think. Actually go through the line. Am I getting fruit? Am I getting flowers? Am I getting spices, herbs, oak? Like, actually think, what kinds of fruit am I getting? But not only what kind, what's the quality of the fruit? So if it's a lime, is it an underripe lime, or is it like a really ripe Meyer lemon, almost orange? And there's not a lot of different kinds of fruit. Think about apples, right? Here, I'm in Hudson Valley in upstate New York. There's so many different kinds of apples that you could really just do a full tasting lineup around them and put a different wine to each one. But when I taste this, I get a lot of Sauvignon Blanc markers here, which are going to be lemon and lime zest, a little bit underripe because of that cool climate. In warmer areas, like sometimes with Chilean Sauvignon Blanc or New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, it's more tropical. It's over the top ripe lemon, lime, grapefruit. There's like a hint of freshly cut grass on this, and grassiness is huge with Sauvignon Blanc. That's a big marker. That's how you'll know it's Sauvignon Blanc if you're doing a blind tasting. And I really just get a hint. It's not over the top. Sometimes in warmer regions, you are going to get like, wow, this is the grassiest thing I've ever smelled, especially if you're sensitive to it. So remembering there's no wrong answers in the world of wine. You can, hey, maybe you worked at the flower market your whole life and you're just picking up on every different type of daffodil and white flower versus red flower. I mean, you can go on and on. Or maybe you're a chef and you're picking up on these spices that I don't even know about, and you're like, oh, this has got the cardamom, and hey, that's good, and good for you, and that's awesome. But most people with Sauvignon Blanc are going to pick up on that really crisp lemon lime zest. And then it's time to take a sip, which is the fun part, right? So I'm swirling it around a little bit. I like to coat the whole mouth, the tongue, the cheeks. And you're like, is she making a milkshake in there? Like, yes, I like to coat everything and see if I'm picking up on sweetness, which would be on the tip of the tongue, Absolutely not. This is a totally dry wine, but you can tell I've got some acidity happening here. So it's definitely a high acid wine, which you can't smell acidity. That's something you can only taste. So as far as the flavors of wine, you know, the types, the fruits, the flowers, that's something you're going to smell more than taste. But acidity, you can only taste. What about alcohol? Well, cooler climates are going to have lower alcohol because sugar plus yeast equals alcohol. And places where the grapes don't get super ripe and sugary, you can't have the potential alcohol going forward. So in these cooler climates, they're lower alcohol, which I think is pretty nice. You get to enjoy it maybe all day if you feel like it, especially if it's like Christmas morning. You know, you might start and then have to cook dinner later and you want to enjoy a little bit of wine. But yeah, so definitely lower alcohol. People always ask, you know, how do you pick up on alcohol with wine? Because it's not like tequila, right? Where you're going to immediately feel like that burn. It a little bit though on the higher alcohol wine. Sometimes there's like a red from a really hot place that has like 17% alcohol, and you'll just breathe in like and feel it right in your throat, just kind of burning you. And this obviously does not do that at all. It's got the acidity, that low alcohol. And then you think about the fruits and flowers that you are smelling. Do you also taste those? Or is it changing? Or do you pick up on something else? For me, yeah, I'm getting the same grapefruit, lemon, lime zest, a lot of just underripe tart fruits, but I'm actually picking up on some fresh herbs as well. So a little bit of cilantro, a little bit of grassiness. This has a lot going on, and it's not over the top like some Sauvignon Blancs, like I said, in warm climates can be like really powerful, full of fruit. Even though Sauvignon Blanc is a very fruit-forward grape, this is not taking me there to like that tropical level. Some of them, you might even taste like banana. This is not like that at all. It's really subdued, and I would pair this personally with cheeses, with salads, a little bit of goat cheese on the salad to cut right through the fat, the acidity cutting through fat. I mean, I love this wine so much. So, yeah, just a little bit herbal. And then I think about the finish. So after you take a sip, can you still taste it? That's really what finish means. So once you take a sip, are you thinking, no, it kind of fell off and I need another sip? Or are you like, wow, it's been 5, 10, 15 seconds later, and I can still taste all the same flowers, herbs, fruit in this wine. That's how I feel with this, absolutely. So I dump that one out and move on to the next one here, which is the Pinot Gris. So this is the 2019 Harry and David Pinot Gris. And I love this wine, but it is just so different than the last one. First of all, the color. Gris actually means gray. So it's, I wouldn't say gray, but on the vine they named it that because it does look a little bit gray compared to the other green grapes. It's not as brilliant, I guess you could say, in color as the Sauvignon Blanc. It's more like a subdued. Sometimes you can pick up on pink and gray tones just kind of at an angle. This is completely different in terms of fruit. So as the Sauvignon Blanc had that lemon lime citrusy thing going on, this is all stone fruit to me. So I'm getting like peaches, pears, a little bit of honeydew melon, but it's actually less fruity and more mineral. So you might be wondering, what is minerality? You know, you always hear it when someone's talking about minerality with wine. Really, all they're talking about is the nearest body of water. So if you're next to the ocean, it might smell and taste like a salty sea spray. But if you're near a river, it might kind of remind you of river rocks and some mossiness to it. This just has that exact like rivery type of thing. So yeah, I'm just swirling and smelling a few times. I'm picking up on a little bit of cinnamon here, which makes me think that there might be some residual sugar, but you can't smell if it's going to be sweet or not. You have to actually taste it. So yeah, It's not sweet like a dessert wine. It's off dry. And I mean so off dry that most people would think it's dry. It's practically dry. There's just a hint of sweetness right on the tip of the tongue, and it more just tastes like a little bit of candied apple. So it has that golden pear, golden apple. Yeah, just a tiny little hint. And then I'm getting, yeah, a little bit of that cinnamon, some herbal. I can definitely feel the weight is bigger here. So when we talk about a body with wine, it just means how heavy does it feel in your mouth? Is it like oat milk that falls off the tongue, or is it like a heavy cream that really sits on the top of the tongue, coats the whole mouth? This isn't super heavy, but it's definitely heavier than the Sauvignon Blanc, which is almost always going to be your lightest in terms of body. So this is a little bit bigger for sure. This Pinot Gris has less acidity. If you don't like that my mouth's watering all the time sensation, then you might really like the Pinot Gris. Even though there is still a good amount of acidity, it's nothing compared to the Sauvignon Blanc. So you could actually pair this with whitefish. You know, you can think about halibut or a chicken, like a roasted chicken. This would be perfect with. So a little bit different in terms of flavor. I wouldn't do something really citrusy with this type of wine. Yeah, definitely mineral. There's a lot going on here, and Pinot Gris is cool. Also, people always ask me, like, is Pinot Gris the same thing as Pinot Grigio? Yes, that's exactly the same thing. Pinot Grigio, it's Italian, and Pinot Gris, it's French, but it's the exact same grape. They do taste different because they come from different places, and obviously the climates are different. And in Oregon, it's going to be a little bit more on the fruitier side because both France and Italy, most of the time, that Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio is going to be cool, even cooler climate with even more acidity. So this is actually kind of closer to Chardonnay, though totally unoaked. And I picked up 0 oak on both of these. And when you pick up oak, smelling usually, but also tasting in a wine, it's going to be like butter, popcorn, vanilla. Everybody has a different way of talking about oak. For me, it really is buttered bagel. And I think it's because I don't really love ice cream the way that some people do, where they're like, oh yeah, this is vanilla ice cream. That's gotta be oak. For me, I'm like, bagel. So it really does depend on your experiences. What are you really eating and that kind of thing. But I love this wine. It's so different. So beautiful. All right, so moving on to the last wine tonight. This is the 2019 Reserve Cabernet Sauvignon. And Cabernet is interesting because, so now we're moving on to reds. We can talk about tannin. Cabernet definitely has a lot of tannin. And how do we know that? Well, we can actually look at tannin because it's such a dark, dark wine. You can't, see your nails through it, for instance. You can't read through it the way that maybe you would in, let's say, Pinot Noir or Gamay. You can see right through those reds. But Cabernet is up there with Shiraz or with Malbec, where it's so deep and dark that it's going to really dry out your whole mouth. So the opposite of acidity is tannin. And reds have tannin because they sit on the skins of the grapes. So when you're picking green grapes to make white wine, you bring it back to the winery, you crush them immediately, and you just throw those skins out. So it just is immediately the juice. With red, those skins, they'll do pump overs and punch downs, and they'll sit there for about 3 weeks to a month, just collecting that beautiful color from the skins. So does rosé have tannin, you might wonder? Yes, most rosé is from red grapes, and it only sits on the skins for 12 to 24 hours in order to get that pink color that you know about rosé. So there is a little bit of tannin with rosé. But Cabernet, you can already see it's going to dry your mouth out. And I think that's kind of cool that you can visualize how it's going to feel in your mouth. But just looking at this and swirling it and smelling it, it's so Cabernet, which Cabernet is very complex. it starts with fruit, and sometimes in a lot of really warm places, it's going to be fruit all the time. But cooler climates, you're going to find what I'm getting here, because it is Oregon, like tobacco, cedar, a little bit of leather. You know, there's the plum, that's a fruit, but there's so much going on here. It almost reminds me of mushrooms. There are some tertiary, earth-driven aromas here, like a little clay. I know, like, if you've ever made pottery, it kind of tastes like a little wet clay, or kind of like bricks. If you've got a brick wall and sometimes you smell it. I know, you got to really think about what to smell and what river rocks to put in your mouth, right? But it's true. Cabernet has a lot going on. And this one, the Reserve, actually sat in oak for a while, American and French. So some people ask, well, what is the difference between American oak and French oak? And why are those really the only two? They're not the only two, but they're the main two. Slavonian is also there, but American oak that sometimes comes from like Missouri or maybe, really Midwest areas, it's so porous and dense that when wine seeps into it, it takes on those aromas and tastes really, really chocolatey. But French oak is so tight-grained and that cooler climate again, so it's more of just a storage vessel, and it doesn't take on that vanilla, cocoa bean, and chocolate, milk chocolatey aroma. So this is really right between, in my opinion. I pick up on it a little on the nose, but I have to taste it to be sure. There's a little bit of dusted cocoa and almost like a coffee bean, like if you were to chew a coffee bean a little bit, but it's really well integrated because of the tannin and just the level of fruit here. So it's plummy, it has blackberries. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of blackberries that I wasn't smelling. So it depends on who you are. If you think you can get everything in the nose as far as the flavor components go, good for you. A lot of people get 90% through their nose, but a lot of the time you're gonna have to taste it just to see like what actually am I picking up on. And here I'm getting a lot more fruit on the palate, but the nose still has some really interesting things like cedar and mushrooms. I mean, this is such a cool wine, but tannin dissolves fat. I kind of talked about that last time, but I would pair this with like a lamb shank or a ribeye, something that would really dissolve the fat and not be, lesser or more than the dish itself. So you can go like all the way here, do like steak and potatoes. This is really top of the line. Like, I don't know what you're doing for the holidays, but if you have a red meat, especially something that's a little charred, this is your wine, absolutely, the Reserve. So yes, any questions right now? I'll let you kind of think about that, but I'll read some questions. Thank you guys. All right, let's see. I got one. Oh, what is my favorite Harry and David wine? Okay. Thank you, ET Travel Tips. Mine is going to be the Reserve Pinot Noir. I just like Pinot Noir because I eat a lot of chicken and a lot of salmon. So something that has low tannins and high acidity, I can just drink before, after, during, and it's really my favorite thing. So